Hello and welcome to the European Report. Here we are again in the European Parliament, in the heart of the European Union in Brussels. In today's programme, we're going to pay tribute to Bonhoeffer, who defied the Nazis over 70 years ago and showed incredible courage. We'll also be discussing where is Europe 70 years on from Victory in Europe Day, when we saw that Europe was liberated from the Nazis. And I'll also be discussing other similar issues in this programme today. So in today's programme, I'm joined by Hannu Takala, Finnish MP. Welcome back to the European Report and welcome back to the European Parliament, Hannu.
Thank you.
And also Joel Rubenfeld, who is the President of the League Against Anti-Semitism.
Thank you.
And also Thomas Sandel, the founder and director for the European Coalition for Israel. I'll firstly start off with you, Hannu, because you've been out of this Parliament for 10 months. So this is your second week back here in the European Parliament. Can you tell us what it's like to be back as a serving Finnish MP here in the European Parliament, and any lessons that you've learned since you've been away?
First of all, it's good to be back. So, yeah, we had the European elections last year, and it wasn't very good for the ALDE, my group here. So the election for me was good as me personally, but Mr. Olli Rehn, who was the former commissioner, he got the more votes and he go in. But Olli Rehn, he looked for something other job, you know, some like to be the chair of the Eurozone, and he was the speeching candidate or top candidate of the ALDE group. So, but when ALDE lost the elections last year, so it's obvious that there were no any vacancy for the ALDE members. So now after 10 months, Olli decided to come back to Finland because 3 weeks ago we had our national parliament elections, and he looking for to be the minister, and he went there back. So I take this seat now, and I'm back here. And as I said, good to be back. And what happened during the last 10 months, I have to say that not very much here in the European Parliament, because in the last autumn they building the new commission, and now the new commission just started to give some proposals. So I think that I'm just on the time. And in my personal life, last 10 months, I have been finalizing my doctoral thesis at the University of Lapland. It was hard work, but almost done. So I think that was good time for me also. And I have to say that I'm not how can I say, watching a lot of what happened here in the European Parliament. I just, concentrate my thesis, and I think that if this opportunity comes, then I'm ready to continue, because I've been here 10 years, so I know more or less how to deal with issues here in this Parliament.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you back. And Joel, it's great to have you back on the programme. I think it's about a year since you've back on the programme. Now, can you tell us something a little bit more about your organisation, the Belgium League Against Anti-Semitism, and why you felt the need for this organisation and what it does?
Well, because of the situation, because of the rise of anti-Semitism in Belgium, but also in all Europe, and that's a very worrying concern. And we need to deal with it very seriously. That's why we launched 1.5 years ago the Belgian League Against Anti-Semitism, which is exclusively dedicated to combating anti-Semitism. I think today we see with different terrorist attacks, but also with the daily anti-Semitic incidents, that this issue is a threat for European Jews. But I think that it would be a mistake to limit this to the European Jewry. This threat is for all Europe, because make no mistake, when you have people in the street shouting death to Jews in Brussels, Paris, Berlin, or other main European cities, behind this message they think also death to Belgium, death to France, death to Germany, death to Europe, death to democracy, death to liberty, death to gender equality. So what is at stake today is the future of Europe, and I deeply think that the future and the fate of European Jewry is the litmus test of the European democracies.
Now, we'll get on to that point, which is extremely interesting, later on in this discussion, Joel, so thank you. And Thomas, can you share with us some of the activities that ECI have been involved in recently? I know that you're here to attend a very important conference on anti-Semitism.
Well, thank you, Simon. It's good to be back, and it's good to be back in good company, both with Joel, but in particular with Hanno, who we need in this parliament. And I think there are many in Finland and elsewhere who were very pleased to see that you came back. So I also want to say an official welcome from our side. I want to mention two things. You may recall that already in November, we as an organization wrote an open letter together with the European Jewish Congress, the Pentecostal European Fellowship, and One Free World International, in support of the persecuted Christians in the Middle East and European Jewry, where we wanted to bring to the attention of the European leadership what was happening in the surrounding neighborhood of Israel, which is a slaughter, a genocide of innocent people, of Christians and other religious minorities. We handed over the open letter already in November, but then with intention of passing it on to the two new leaders, the President of the European Council, Donald Tusk, and Federica Mogherini. Yesterday, we met with the Chief Foreign Policy Advisor of Tusk, were able to hand over the open letter and discuss the issues and go into depth into what could be done to protect Christians in this region, but also expressing our concern of the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. And I think it's worthwhile mentioning that we have a strong ally in the new President, Donald Tusk. The second thing that I want to mention is that I just came out of a conference a few hours ago on the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe and the world, and the theme was the defining moment for Europe. And I think many people have come to this conclusion, and I think Joel would agree that this is a defining moment where Europe and the leaders of Europe will have to stand up as one man and say no to what we see happening on the streets of Brussels, Toulouse, Paris, Copenhagen. The list goes on. I was together with our European director yesterday, Perrine Dufour from Paris. She mentioned something that I was not aware of. She said that 2 weeks ago in Paris, the French police were able to stop and dismantle a terrorist attack on two churches in Paris. And they said they had clear instructions from Syria, from ISIS, to go and detonate the bombs at the Christian church in Paris. So the stakes are becoming higher, and we cannot go on with business as usual. So this was, for me, a very interesting conference. I may have reasons to come back to some of the comments that were made, but we live in a new day and a new season, but it's good to be together with strong advocates like Joel and Hanno in this game.
Absolutely. I think we need to really discuss the events that occurred yesterday as we record this program in Texas. Pretty much, Thomas, where we've seen two Islamist terrorists try and attack a conference in which Geert Wilders was speaking, organised by Pamela Geller, a very controversial conference in which they had to design a particular image of Muhammad, and this is what sparked the attack. Have you got any kind of comments to say about freedom of expression and also cultural sensitivity?
Well, thank you for asking the question. Obviously, it is a tricky question. The debate continues. I would still like to make a comment on behalf of ECI, which is, after all, a Christian organization. When Jews are slaughtered randomly, like at the Jewish Museum, for no reason, when Jews are shot down in cold blood shopping for Shabbat, there are absolutely no excuse. This is typical anti-Semitism and should always be called for what it is. When we provoke consciously in a way that I don't quite see the. For me, it would be different, like it was in Copenhagen. You have an intellectual discussion about freedom of speech, discussing the, what are the limits and what are the concerns we should take. That's for me legitimate. I don't want to applaud a conference where you want to mock other people's religious symbols. And obviously there's no excuse ever for killing anyone for expressing what still is their freedom to express. But as a Christian organization, we want to make this statement to say, no, this is not the way forward. This won't help anyone. It will just make the situation worse. And even for people in the middle that want to have a civilized dialogue, it will not make it easier. So of course we deplore the killings, but also I think it's a sober moment to say, no, we don't think going in this direction of provocation will help anyone.
Yeah. Joel, do you think increasingly that America has been dragged into a conflict, particularly as we're now seeing that America's facing similar terrorist attacks on their soil? I mean, we saw the horrendous Boston bombing last year, which killed so many marathon runners at the Boston Marathon. Of course, we had 9/11 before that. Do you think the American public and the American government are becoming a lot more aware of the threat posed by Islamic extremists to American society?
Well, remember that it started in September 11, 2000 in US. Before the bombing in Madrid, in London, in Toulouse, in Brussels, in Copenhagen, in Paris. It started 15 years ago in New York and in Washington. So of course they are dragged into this fight between a new totalitarianism. Today that's what we are facing. Europe, let's say that the Western world was those last 100 years confronted to three major totalitarianism: communism, Nazism, and today Islamism. So it's a long war. I think we are just at the beginning. In 1 century, it will be written in history books that it started in New York on September 11, 2000. Actually, it started
2001.
2001, sorry. Actually, it started earlier in Israel, because what the Western world in general is experiencing today, let's say that the representative of the Western values in the Middle East, the Jewish state of Israel, is experiencing already from decades. So, of course, they are aware, but in US, I'm not sure that the current administration is dealing with this issue as we get used with other US administration. We are living since World War II, we are living in a new world with a new paradigm where the leader of the free world is the United States, the United States. And I think it's a good thing that the stronger and the brightest democracy in the world is leading this fight. Since a few years, since the Obama administration, I think that they're on vacation. And that's why today we are living in a very messy situation with a rising Russia, with Vladimir Putin, with the messy situation in Ukraine, in Syria, and in other parts of the world. So it's a problem. We are facing a major threat, which is an existential threat for our democracies. And I don't know today who is leading this. And more recently, we saw this on the Iranian issue, which is definitely a major threat. Iran is a major sponsor of terrorism in the world. Of course, with its proxy in Lebanon, Hezbollah, but also when they are sponsoring terrorist attack in Argentina, in Bulgaria, and in other places in the world. And on the negotiation on the Iranian nuclear case, we see that the US and Europe is also following America on this. I think they are not taking the right path. I think it's a short-term view. And the leader today of the free world on this specific issue, the Winston Churchill on this specific issue, is Benjamin Netanyahu. It's the Israeli prime minister who has the courage and the lucidity to say, no, it's a bad deal and we'll have to pay this with big time. We'll pay this in a few years. So I think let's say that the worst is to come.
Hannu, I kind of really want your reaction on this one. That you know, many Christians get offended, but they don't take violence as a course of action. How important is it that when people have grievances, they engage with the political process rather than taking action into their own hands?
You know, I think, especially here in Europe, we have to remember what is our values. The European Union is the union of the peace and prosperity. So I think that we have to underline more our values like human rights, freedom, express, and of course we have to respect each other's. But the way how we solve problems, I hope that we can find the way to solve the problems peacefully and by negotiations. And of course, it's a Jewish tradition, it's a Christian traditions, and it's related to our faith. But I think that when we are here in the heart of the European Union, it's good to remember that those values, what we share, the Jewish and Christians, they are the European Union values also, and just like to promote that.
Mm-hmm. And also in this program today, we'll be discussing the life of Bonhoeffer, who was a remarkable German theologian who stood alone and defied the Nazis and was murdered for being involved in a plot against Hitler. Thomas, we saw incredible leadership and courage by Dietrich Bonhoeffer in his incredible stance against the Nazis during World War II and opposed the Nazi regime and stood alone against almost an entire culture or entire nation to protect the Jewish people. What do you think the legacy that Bonhoeffer leaves behind for us today?
I think there are many issues that we could look at Dietrich Bonhoeffer's life. You may also recall that on the 9th of April, it was the 70th anniversary of his public execution by hanging. Interestingly, just a few weeks before Hitler committed suicide and the war was over. So there are many existential questions that can be raised to say, well, how could it be? Obviously, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a man of great courage. He was a very intelligent man. He came from a family of academics and world-class scientists, but he was also a man of deep faith. And I think sometimes it has been neglected how important faith was for him as a Christian to find the courage to stand against Hitler and Nazi ideology at this time. If I remember correctly, I think the book of Hannu that you wrote a number of years ago was also where to find courage. And so Hannu may want to comment on this later. But also intellectually, I think there's something we need to, and I did it in a newsletter recently. Dietrich Bonhoeffer did not make a distinction between God's people in what we as Christians call the Old Testament and the Jews that were living in Germany. At the official church that was being controlled by the Nazis at the time, they would make this distinction, say, well, Old Testament had nothing to do with the New Testament, and the Jewish people had no connection whatsoever to the Christian gospel. Whereas Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, no, of course, you know, these Jewish people are the same people that we see walking around the streets in Germany are being persecuted. And he even used the phrase, he said, well, these are God's people. So how could I, as a Christian, just be passive and quiet while this is happening? Bonhoeffer, as you may recall, he was imprisoned by the Nazis because he tried to help 7 German Jews to enter into neutral Switzerland. And I think there's also a place where he said, there can be no greater honor than to, die, if this is the ultimate price, even to die for God's people. So obviously it comes back to finding that courage in a culture where almost everyone else would fear and live in fear, and also try to appease, or just to to close their eyes and don't see what is going on. I think that you don't need the intelligence of Dietrich Bonhoeffer to realize that Germany was on a slippery slope to destruction, but it takes that special grace and special courage to just stand up and be counted. And I think that is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer symbolizes today.
And Hanno, what can we learn about the courage and the bravery of Bonhoeffer to stand by our convictions despite the incredible, overwhelming odds that could be against us?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to say that Bonhoeffer is one of my heroes. If I have to put a name, it's a Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Eric Liddell von Scotland, and then Martin Luther King. I think that all of them, they were very, very brave. So, for me, if I try to put into one sentence what I think about Bonhoeffer, he was a faithful and obedient man who always followed the will of God. So, and I think that that's something that he was obedient and he was faithful. And he, was not just about the words, but also the actions. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, this led to his death also, but we can say that he was a remarkable person who led by example. And I think that's when you ask what we can learn, that there's much we can learn for him.
No, excellent.
Simon, could I just...
Of course.
Because when you look at today's situation, I think that's always important. We ask the question, well, what's the relevance for today? There is a relevance today in the Christian community because we have exactly the same discussion. The Jewish people in the Old Testament, the covenants that were given to the Jewish people, to the land, are they relevant or not? And here you have it may seem like a trivial theological question for some, but the consequences are very significant. You can either say, well, it has nothing to do with the New Testament, with the gospel. These vicious Jewish people, they just came and stole the land and it has nothing to do with the Bible. And then you go into the BDS camp with boycott, divestments and sanctions. And you see, sadly, Christians at the forefront of this movement now to boycott Israeli goods, because they read the Bible in a way that Bonhoeffer would have disapproved of. So I think, if you say, like Bonhoeffer said, no, these are the same people that, God spoke about in the Old Testament, they're still around, the covenants are still in place, and, that's why we need to stand with them. So I think this is a point just to show the relevance also of for today.
No, I think it's very, very relevant for today, and I think that Bonhoeffer's courage to defy the Nazi regime is nothing but incredible and remarkable that one man can stand against incredible evil and tyranny, which will bring Joel in. Joel, we saw that with Bonhoeffer's life that he knew that anti-Semitism was wrong in his heart. He was willing to make a stand, and he paid the ultimate sacrifice for the defense of Israel and the Jewish people. In your opinion, what has Bonhoeffer done for the Jewish people, and what can we learn against his stand against the evil that is anti-Semitism?
Well, I think that Bonhoeffer is definitely inspiring all of us here around the table and million and hundreds of million people in the world. But the less we can do today to pay homage to his sacrifice is to honor his commitment and to apply today what he did 70 years ago. Right. By the way, today fighting anti-Semitism is not taking risk as it was for Bonhoeffer or other people who are the cream, the elite of our humanity, which were the writers among the nations. 70 years ago, you could pay by your own life and the life of your children fighting against anti-Semites. Today there is no Gestapo in the street. Today there are laws in several European countries. at the European level fighting anti-Semitism. So it should be much more easy to fight against anti-Semitism today than yesterday, despite the fact that if you go to make a survey in the street asking to people if you was 20 in 1940, would you have been a collaborationist or resistant? Probably 99% of people will say, I would be a resistant. So let's be a resistant today. Today, again, in Europe, people are killing Jews because they are Jewish. And I don't see dozens of million people going to the streets to say never again. Europe was built on one promise. This promise is never again. And today we are facing two threats. First, the people who say not never again, but never happened. We see a rise of negationism, mainly in Central and Eastern European countries, with rising political parties like Jobbik in Hungary, like Golden Dawn in Greece, like other in Ukraine and in Bulgaria and other countries. And you have people who are not saying never again or never happened. They say one more time, once again. You see this in some country like Iran, which, and I still don't understand this, how could it happen, became a reasonable partner for peace. We see this with terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, like Hamas. Just read their covenant, their constitution. Hear what they say. Hear what Hassan Nasrallah, who is the leader of Hezbollah, he said 10, 15 years ago, it's good that all Jews gather in Israel, in the Zionist entity. He never say Israel, he speak about the Zionist entity. It's good. So we will not have the pain to go all over the world to go to kill them. So those people are really in the line of the Third Reich ideology, and despite that, some people find that they are reasonable partner for peace. So that's really a nonsense. So for Bonhoeffer and for all those people who paid the heavy price to save Jews 70 years ago, the least we can do is to apply today what they did 70 years ago, and we are not taking so much risk. So that's what we need to take in account. Also, I would like to say that I think that being a writer among the nation or being on the right side of the history, it's not a question of faith, it's not a question of color of skin. You spoke, Thomas, about the fact that in BDS, some Christians are involved. I would go further than you. Some Jews are also involved in BDS. Look at people like Noam Chomsky, Norman Finkelstein, and Greta Berlin, other people who are leading BDS activists, they are Jewish. So it's not about a religion, a color of skin, it's about what you believe in. And of course, faith can be a source of doing good. But in some cases, it can be a source of inspiration of doing evil also. And we are seeing this today with the rise of Islamism. They are taking their religion to do evil, but do not forget something. The biggest number, numerically speaking, of the victims of Islamists, they are Muslims. When Islamist terrorist goes to Toulouse, to the Jewish school in 2012, to kill 3 children because they are Jewish, and killing the father of 2 of them, he killed them because they were Jewish. But this same ideology goes in a school in Pakistan, in Peshawar, killing 132 children, and all of them were Muslim. So it's not really a question of a fight between religion. I think it's a question of fight between the good and evil. It's a fight between light and darkness. And that's what we are facing today. Darkness can be religious or it can be irreligious, as it was with communism, as it was with Nazism, as it's today with Islamism.
Very good point, Joel. And this month marks the celebration in which we all remember the 70th anniversary of a victory in Europe known as V-Day, when the courage and bravery of British, American and Canadian troops liberated Europe from Nazi tyranny. Joel, this is a special time for Europe. 70 years on, we remember the liberation of Europe from the Nazis over 70 years ago. How do you see that Europe has changed over those past 70 years? And do you believe that those hard-won freedoms that were fought 70 years ago are now being eroded?
It's being eroded. Since 70 years, Europe is much better than 70 years ago. Look for all kinds of minorities. 70 years ago, being a woman in Europe, you could not open a bank account or you could not go abroad without the authorization of your husband. 70 years ago, homosexuals, they had to get in clandestinity. 70 years ago, all kinds, of minorities, people were persecuted or they had to eat themselves. So, in general, it's much better. But today, because of the greatness of democracy, which is a fantastic political system, or let's put it the other way, like Winston Churchill said, the democracy is the worst political system except all the others. So till today, it's the best we did, politically speaking. And some people, they are exploiting the weakness of democracy. And what we forgot, because at least in Western Europe, I'm not speaking about Eastern Europe where 30 years ago it was still a totalitarian regime, but in Western Europe, let's say that 90% of the living European people, they were born in democracy. So they think, and that's a mistake, and a dangerous mistake, it could become a dangerous mistake, they think that democracy is something very natural. No. Democracy, it costs lives and lives for people and for generation to gain all these democratic values, all these democratic laws. And we need to understand that today, again, democracy is assaulted, and we need to fight back and we need to protect the democracy. So what we need, the lesson what we have to take today from the liberation is that the human being is capable of the worst. And again, we have some people who want to apply this, to develop this, and we need to protect, to defend our democracies. And that's what some people in different circles and in political circles, like Anu is doing at the European Parliament with a lot of other MEPs. But we need to understand that there is a clear and present danger. Right now, we are at the crossroads. And according to what we will do today, according to the way we will manage this, on the political level, on the media level, on the academic level, on the civil society level, according to what we will do, will depend the future of our children. And if we are not very strong against this totalitarianism, there is another threat, the rise of far right. Because, make no mistake, terrorists, Islamic terrorists, they can kill, they can hit in Europe, they can kill dozens, they can kill hundreds, they can kill thousands of European Democrats. But they will not, in a near future, they will not be able to gain majority in the elections. They are not enough. There are maybe 1%, 2%, 3% who are ready to, or 10% who are ready to vote for the local Islamic State party. But what can happen is that there will be enough people, 50% plus one, who will vote for the far right, thinking that it will be the antidote to Islamism. And that's another threat we need to take into account. And to those people who are weak or ignorant enough to think that it's an antidote to the Islamism, I would just want to tell them one thing. You do not cure the plague with the cholera. you will not cure the Islamist plague with the far-right cholera. You die of both, of plague or cholera.
And Thomas, I want to bring you into this discussion, really. I mean, what does V-Day mean for you being Finnish? But also, isn't it time that we should think, ponder and reflect upon Europe and particularly on the Nazi tyranny that occurred on this continent over 70 years ago?
Yeah, you phrased the question slightly different. You said being Finnish, and it raises two dimensions. One is, of course, that the totalitarianism that we had to face and we were on the brink of having to give into, of course, had a different
Soviet Union
flavor. That was Soviet communism, and of course, if you look at the numbers of people being killed during that area, it's quite a high number. And obviously, looking at the situations today at the border, and I never thought in my lifetime that I would have to worry about things that I realize I have to pay attention to, you know, even in the last few days. So that is one way of answering, to say, well, it happened 70 years ago. It doesn't mean that it cannot happen again. And we've seen Ukraine, of course, as one example. But obviously, coming back to Victory Day and the victory of Nazi Germany, and again, forgive me, Joel, I'm speaking here as a Christian, and you know, we have to look at it first of all to realize that Germany was a Christian nation. So our discussion, our internal discussion in the Christian community is to say, well, how could this happen in what should have been a Christian civilization? And so you know, Simon, we have this, what we call a global prayer call for 100 days from the liberation of Auschwitz on the 27th of January till Victory Day, which will be next week, when we will be in Jerusalem, to ponder and reflect and say, well, what does it mean 70 years after? And it is a fact, and it's an embarrassing fact, of course, that Hitler could never have come to power if the Christian church in Germany at the time would have reacted and would have seen the warning signals in time, and like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and others would have stood up and said, hey, this is not in line with, you know, what we believe, what our culture is, what our civilization is. But they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. But I do agree with Joel. I mean, the point is not to reflect so much on what happened. It's more an issue of saying, well, what is happening today? That is our motto with European Coalition for Israel, to say also, well, what are we doing today? And so for us, this has been a time to recommit ourselves to the fight that Bonhoeffer was involved in, to stand diligently on the side of the Jewish people, to stand on the side of Israel. Since we know that the fight is not over. I mean, the numbers that we hear from the EU Fundamental Rights Agency are the highest ever when it comes to anti-Semitic violence and people answering the question, do you feel safe and secure in Europe? So the question is very concrete. How will we react this time? And this is the daily struggle, the daily challenge for an organization such as ours, ECI, to say, well, how can we get the message out? How can we shake up the Christians to say, listen, you just can't live on like before, you know, watching Voice of Finland and, you know, play golf and do your small hobbies, and at the same time realize that there's a war going on in the Middle East with killings of Christians, with, you know, a global diplomatic war against Israel and the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe. So for us, this is a time of self-seeking, but also coming out much stronger with a commitment. And final point on this question is to say that for us, it has been very powerful being led by our chairman, who's German, Harald Eckert. He's been traveling all the four corners of the world with this message. A message which can only come out of Europe, which can only come out of Germany, of someone who knew what once happened to warn the nations. And we should always remember, you know, in many parts of the world, they don't have this experience. But we have an obligation to warn them and to say, well, listen, this happened once, in a civilized country, it can happen again, and therefore we need to stand firm.
Yeah, and Hanno, I think we have to remember that Europe and European institutions were built out of the ashes of World War II. In particular, that European nations would not go to war against each other, that they would form a cooperation agreement in terms of trade, and then cultural and then political times. Do you believe 70 years on that the European Union, the whole European project, has been a success in terms of keeping the peace between European nations?
Even though I'm quite critical concerning the EU, and I think that European Union is a process which continue, and I would like to say that European Union is a union of values. I have to say that what comes to peace and what comes to prosperity, so yes, European Union has been a success. It's not the perfect, but it has definitely been a success. And but even though we can and should be critical still, and because we see different kind of phenomenon like anti-Semitism, racism, xenophobia, what is raising at the moment in the Union, and of course those things are against those values and against that agreement what we gave 70 years ago, never again, and it still seems to me that people are not faithful for this statement what we gave, and they don't remember that anymore. So we have to underline, as I have said many times, we have to underline our values and look after that those values, democracy, freedom of express, and that we have the zero and human rights, of course, and that we have the zero tolerance for the anti-Semitism, racism, and xenophobia. They are our values, strong values now and the future.
And Joel, I mean, if we look at Europe today, 70 years on from its liberation from Nazi tyranny, isn't there a great danger that those certainly at the heads of our European institutions, also those very much involved in the European Commission, are seeing new dangers emerge on the European continent? And you've also mentioned them in the programme. I mean, we've seen a resurgence of Russian power and influence, particularly in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. We've also seen that our European armies are below 2% of gross national product, which means that we're actually below the requirement to actually be a member of the NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So therefore, European nations are no longer spending money on defence and cut their defence budgets. We're also seeing the rise of anti-Semitism in Europe today to the extent we've not seen it since the 1930s and since the 1940s. In light of this, what does it say about Europe 70 years on from its liberation?
Well, it says that what a lot of European people are thinking also, that democracy is forever. So sometimes Europe is a little bit, more than a little bit, even candid, and they put themselves, they put ourselves under the US umbrella, which is a good thing, but and under the NATO umbrella, but we see today that there are some weakness, and non-democratic countries are using this, like Russia and other countries. They are using this weakness to develop themselves. So that's a natural process. And about Europe, about the European construction in general, I would like to paraphrase what Winston Churchill said about democracy. I think the European Union project is the worst project existing for Europe except all the others. So of course we need to be critical about some elements and some facts in the European Union, but let's not forget that since 70 years, 60 years, we are not killing each other anymore. Look back the 2-3 last millennium. Each decade, each 20 years, there was a big fight between Germany and France and UK and Russia and Serbia and I don't know, name it. And so since 60, 70 years, there is peace between European countries because there was a shift of paradigm and saying that the best way to not kill each other is to become a big family. So we are a big European family, and that's a fantastic achievement. But there are, like in all process and all models, there are some problems. And we need to identify those problems and we need to fix those problems. One of these problems is the army. We do not have one European army. How could you be understood, respected, and in some cases feared by rogue countries if you do not have an army? Who takes us seriously? We Europeans. Iran? North Korea? Sudan? There is no one army. In US there is one army, US is respected, US is feared but we need to go further in the process of European construction, and we need to become a real big family, and a big family as one shield. And this shield has to be a European army. But that's the idea and also the ideal situation. But I don't know if it's achievable. I don't know if it's achievable because at the very beginning of the European construction, with a very big and good project, we are family, but with very different members of this family.
Exactly. So, but doesn't that pose a threat,
to this? You know, if you are around the table, and when I go, I've been a few times to the US Congress to speak about anti-Semitism, and also at the European Parliament. The big difference when you are in those rooms, there is some difference, but one big difference. In US, there is no 28 translators. You speak one language. Here we are a big family with 28 members speaking different language. And you cannot understand each other if one speaks Finnish, the other speak French, the other speak German, the other speak Polish, the other speak Italian. So that's a big obstacle, and that's more philosophical thought. But I'm not sure that we'll be able to construct a strong, unified United States of Europe if we are speaking 28 different languages. So that's a problem. But we need to be constructive. We need to find some way to some shortcuts, and really to go further with this process, taking in account the critics, because there are some Eurosceptic who are raising critics who are not relevant at all. But some of those critics are relevant. Yeah. So we need to be very open-minded, but to understand that we are sharing the same future. And if Europe is splitting away, I don't give maybe one generation to fight each other again, military speaking, on the military field.
Okay. I fundamentally disagree with your point of a European army. I think it will actually break up the command and control centres, and particularly that the British and the French armies contribute so much to NATO and NATO armed forces to be under European command. I think it would be an absolute disastrous decision myself.
But maybe you are wrong, Simon, but that's the advantage of democracy.
Yes.
We can disagree.
Absolutely. Freedom of speech, which is a good thing. And, well, we're down to the last 6 minutes or so of the programme. So Thomas, when after the ashes of the Holocaust emerged, when Europe was at its point of absolute desolation after the Nazi genocide and wars across Europe and what have you, was left Europe desolate. Europe vowed never again. Are we not in danger of actually losing that today with the rise of anti-Semitism? That the promises made 70 years ago to say that we would defeat this evil, that Europe would not permit a Holocaust again. Aren't we in some way allowing the same process and the same rhetoric that inspired the Nazis to take place on this continent again, which then led to the Holocaust?
Well, thank you for the question. As I mentioned, I just came out of a conference where this was debated for some 3-4 hours. And I think the message that came out of this conference, which I also would agree on, is that as of the last few months, there is a new tone in Europe.
Yes.
which we haven't heard for many years. And I'm speaking about the Prime Minister of France, I'm speaking about the Prime Minister of Britain, I'm speaking about the German leader Angela Merkel, where I would say, and I'm quoting Bernard-Henri Lévy, who says that the problem today is not necessarily the government. And we have to understand the problem 70 years ago was fundamentally different. It was an evil government. Today, Jews in France, by and large, they are very grateful for the support that they're receiving from the government. What they are more worried about is the fact that they say, for them, civil society is the problem. And I think Germany is a very good example of the same tendency. If you ask any responsible political leader in Germany about anti-Semitism, about Israel for that matter, you will get good answers. If you go out down the street, if you go out on the pub and you ask the same question, you will see that they do not synchronize with the political elite. So what I see, and I think Joel also mentioned earlier that there is a bit of a problem in terms of communication from the White House. And I would go as far as to say that, Prime Minister Cameron and Manuel Valls and Merkel are much clearer on this issue than the man in the White House at the moment. Also in naming what the problem is. The problem has a name. It's not simply radical ideology of any sort. And I think the leadership here in Europe have been quite frank in naming what the problem is. You know, as you said, yes, there is neo-Nazis, there is right-wing extremists, left-wing extremists, but there is also radical Islam. And we should be able to, in order to identify the problem, we have to, you know, call a spade a spade. So I think, to answer your question, lessons have been learned. It took a long time. I think this is a defining moment. Maybe it is too late, but I think the message is getting across in Paris, in Berlin and London.
And Hannu, what role can you play now that you're back here in the European Parliament in standing up against the evil, which is anti-Semitism?
As I earlier said, that it's not just about the words, but also the actions. Exactly. And I think that we have to looking for what happened in our society. It's just one example, if I can share with you. It was 3 weeks ago when we had the parliament elections in Finland. Before that, you know, the many parties like my party in north part of Finland, and they campaigning and the party events taking place of the one department store name is Kärkkäinen. And this Kärkkäinen department store owner, CEO, the Finnish court had found the owner guilty of the anti-Semitism. They have some kind of tabloid newspaper, and he wrote very anti-Semitic stories about there. And I said to my party members and also the other party members that I'm not going to take part of any events what is in the Kärkkäinen place, you know, because we have to show to him that we don't accept his behavior. Exactly. But, you know, people say, no, what you're talking about, he's just, you know, and they don't care, you know. And what comes to my mind, I didn't go there, but people don't understand why. Like, hey, come on, it's just, you know this attitude. And it comes to my mind what, I think it was Martin Luther King who said that it's not the badness of the bad people, but the ignorance of the good people.
That's a good
you know, and I think that we have to be very strict and, you know, the very, how can I say, very clear and say that also by actions that we don't accept that kind of behavior. And we can, as I propose, that we can say to Mr. Kärkkäinen that we're not going to have any events in his places or front of his places before he apologized and he changed his behavior. But it seems that people are lazy and okay, that, you know, and that's what I mean, that what we can do, that we can try to do also the actions and show the examples for the other ones and try to raise the awareness of the people that for that kind of things.
Yeah, and gentlemen, our time's up. So thank you very much for joining me on today's European report. And I just want to thank you for watching today's programme. I think we should reflect, we should ponder. and we should remind ourselves of the horrors that occurred on this continent in Europe under Nazi tyranny. And great gratitude goes to American, British and Canadian forces who liberated Europe 70 years ago. But let's also remember that peace is essential for Europe, and that European development and cooperation go hand in hand. And the key central point of European freedom is how Europe treats its Jewish population. And to protect our freedoms, we need to protect European Jewry. So thank you for watching today's European Report.